In some parts of the world, the government isn't who people rely on. If your child gets sick, you don't call the state. You call the cartel. If your street needs paving, they pay for it. If someone robs you, they decide the punishment. They run food programs. They enforce curfews. They collect taxes. They control who stays and who is forced out. This isn't a movie. This is real life in parts of Latin America and even in pockets of Africa and Asia. Somehow, criminal organizations stopped hiding in the shadows and started replacing the government itself. The question is, how did that happen? But this didn't start randomly. To understand how cartels took over, you have to go back to 1980s Colombia and to one man who rewrote the rules. Pablo Escobar didn't just build a drug empire. He built something far more dangerous, a parallel state. At the height of his power, the Medellín cartel was making an estimated $420 million every single week. That kind of money doesn't just buy luxury, it buys control. Escobar used it in two calculated ways. First, he bought the system from the inside. Judges, police chiefs, politicians, military officers. He had a simple policy: plata or plomo, silver or lead. Take the money or take a bullet. And thousands chose the money. But the second move was even more strategic. He went straight to the people the government had ignored. He built housing in the slums, funded local football teams, handed out cash in neighborhoods that had been abandoned for decades. So when people needed help, it didn't come from the government. It came from Escobar. And that changed everything. Because once people depend on you, they protect you. That combination, corruption at the top, loyalty at the bottom, became the cartel playbook. And versions of it have been repeated across the world ever since. Escobar's death in 1993 was supposed to be the end. It wasn't. Because the system he built didn't disappear. It evolved. The power vacuum didn't stay in Colombia. It moved north, into Mexico. Cartels like Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation took control of the cocaine routes and expanded into meth, fentanyl, and human trafficking. But drugs weren't what made them unstoppable. It was what the money allowed them to become. By the mid-2000s, parts of Mexico were no longer fully governed by the state. In places like Michoacán, Guerrero, and Tamaulipas, officials were compromised. Police answered to cartel bosses, and entire regions operated under cartel authority. When the government sent in the military, the cartels didn't hide. They fought back with military-grade weapons, armored vehicles, even drones carrying explosives. And then came the moment that exposed everything. In 2019, Mexican forces captured the son of El Chapo in the city of Culiacán. What happened next looked less like a police operation and more like a war. Within hours, hundreds of cartel gunmen flooded the streets, blocked highways, and surrounded security forces. The city was under siege. By the end of the day, the government released him. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. This is where the story changes. Cartels don't survive for decades just because they're violent. Lots of violent groups collapse over time. The ones that survive do so because they exploit a weakness in the system. They become useful. And once a criminal organization becomes useful to ordinary people, removing it becomes far more difficult than simply making arrests. Because what keeps cartels alive isn't just fear. It's a cycle. Cartels make money. That money corrupts local officials. Corruption weakens the state. And over time, citizens lose trust. So when governments fail to provide security, jobs, food, or order, people turn to whoever actually provides them. That's where the cartel steps in. Communities become dependent. Cartels gain loyalty, intelligence, even new recruits. And the cycle continues. In parts of El Salvador, gangs like MS-13 controlled neighborhoods not just through fear, but through local employments and control. In Brazil, groups like Comando Vermelho enforced rules inside favelas, punished theft, and even imposed COVID curfews while the government struggled to respond. And this model didn't stay regional. The Sinaloa Cartel now operates across more than 50 countries. In Myanmar, after the 2021 military coup weakened the state, armed groups in the Golden Triangle expanded massive meth production, operating less like criminal gangs and more like parallel governments. In West Africa, trafficking networks embedded themselves into political systems, with cocaine moving through ports under the protection of corrupt officials who were supposed to stop it. This is how cartel influence spreads, not by replacing governments overnight, but by filling the gaps inside failing systems. Which leads to the real question. What happens when a criminal organization becomes more reliable than the state? Because that's the real shift. Not power, not money. Reliability. Governments keep responding with arrests, military force, and crackdowns. But cartels remain because they don't need to completely defeat the government. They just need to keep showing up where governments fail or disappear. And in the end, real power doesn't come from titles or elections. It comes from the people and who they rely on when it matters most. And once that changes, it's very hard to take back. If you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe.